With North American Proving Grounds finally beginning with the Risen Champions League 2021 winter season, I wanted to make a video shining a light on a few players I personally have had my eyes on and will be watching during the course of this year's amateur season. For the sake of making this a digestible video, I've set up a few rules in this list in order to not overbloat my points with me making constant qualifications and concessions. Number 1, I am biased. Literally everyone is biased, and my list will absolutely be colored with the personal insight that I have on players. Different people have different insight, and I find no issue with my list differing from other amateur pundits based on the insight that I may or may not have on certain players. Number 2, I'm not going to stack this list with the obvious. Is Solafide good? Yes, but I'm not going to spend 10 minutes talking about 5 players everyone already knows about. I regard this list as cryptography in the literal sense. I want to point out players that may be overlooked from an outsider's perspective. Number 3, I will actively ignore any controversy regarding the players I will be describing. This may upset some of you that feel I have an active moral obligation to point out why these players may or may not be regarded as competitively viable or reliable considering their past behavior inside or outside of the game. But I believe that there is a time and place for that, and I'm not here to do that. And finally, number 4. I'm not going to include 3, 4, or 5 players on the same team on this list. I want to hit on as many different teams as possible, so I only want to point out their strongest points that I perceive on that roster. That doesn't mean that these teams' other players are bad or less remarkable in some way than the players that I do talk about. Just that I don't want to spend valuable time discussing an entire team when I can be hitting on great players from my diverse selection of teams. Furthermore, this list is in no particular order and it's going to be long already, so I'm not going to waste any more time. I'd like to begin with a lock screen legend, Certi, top laner for Evil Genius Prodigies. While jungler Tomio and AD carry Shiro often take much of the glory on the star-studded squad, Certi takes my personal pick from the team due to being a similarly large fish in a comparatively small pond. He's one of the best Camille's outside of LCS or Academy, and he's extremely solid in lane due to his matchup knowledge and recognition of when to push his advantage. In particular, one area he excels at is timing his trades on his level ups, even on poor matchups. While playing Ornn versus Shen, a very Shen-sided matchup, he builds a slow push towards the Shen, which generates a temporary EXP advantage, and when he hits level 5, he does his best to prevent the crash by not hitting the wave with abilities or extra auto attacks, and he takes as much time as possible to trade with the Shen with this wave advantage and EXP lead. This results in forcing Shen to burn his teleport, as he is under a dive threat with the monumental health lead Certi built off timing his trades correctly. He then converts this advantage vertically by teleporting to thwart a dive attempt by ISU. This is by no means an isolated incident. Certi does this a lot, gaining summoner advantages, solo kill advantages, etc. depending on the matchup. While this is by no means advanced, on the contrary, it's really fundamental, Certi shows a higher proficiency in it compared to other amateur top laners, and is just one aspect which distinguishes him from the pack of rather low-tier amateur competition. Certi's laning lends a big advantage to the top side of EG Prodigies. Moving on, Wildcard's bottom lane, Daption and Team Luke comprise what's likely to be a top 2 Proving Grounds bottom lane at their peak. Team Luke is inexperienced and amateur, although filling in time with Academy scrims for CLG's Katsuri, alongside a plethora of solo queue challenger experience, has given him a good basis to build on. Daption, on the other hand, is an amateur mainstay with a wealth of experience across the board, with early breakout success on CLT Phoenix during the 2020 SGC until the team completely fell apart. While these pieces may have not demonstrated much alone, together they make for great fits for each other. Luke is extremely aggressive throughout the laning phase on his signature Kaisa and Samira, and Daption has adapted well on a kill-on-crash style with engaged supports, accurately contesting the enemy when they attack on freezes. Wildcard's bottom lane is definitely one to look out for due to their offensively defensive style. They'll pin the lane in their favor and aggress whenever the enemy looks to snap their favorable state, and their synergy carries over into the later game. Luke especially has great killer instinct in teamfights, and Daption recognizes opportunities to link with jungler Trickster throughout the mid game. I'd like to see more early cross-map proactivity from Thapshin, and sometimes Luke can go too far with his aggression, but each of these things can be tempered while they have great bases to build on. One player I initially overlooked before I actually realized who it was Conviction's top laner Faesal, who previously went by the IGN of Racecar, who I and many others recognized as an Olaf top player in solo queue. In solo queue and in his competitive debut on the otherwise underwhelming Conviction, Faesal has demonstrated his great mechanical prowess versus Supernova, where despite being on the losing team, he absolutely dominated his 1v1 matchups, and versus CCG, where even in the disadvantageous Aatrox versus Kled matchup, he still finds many opportunities to create micro advantages and demonstrate his strength in teamfights. Faesal is still new and amateur, but he's already distinguished himself as a player to watch on a lower mid-tier team by roughing up some of the older players in the block. I can't wait to see Olaf get nerfed, so next time Greg's top is whipped out as a safe blind pick, Faesal can play his signature Olaf top as a pocket counter. Speaking of Supernova, I can't talk about the squad without mentioning their jungler Maddie, who longtime amateur viewers may remember as the jungler on the breakout squad of Prussian esports, who won Upsurge during the 2019 season. Maddie has been impressive on his Lilia versus Cloud9 Amateur, where he dominated the game and pushed his advantage despite being in a borderline unplayable matchup in Lilia versus Olaf. Maddie works remarkably well with his mid laner and Strumpist, and while I do agree with the criticism that he has his faults and can int, he is clearly a solid shot caller from the mid lane and looks much better than during his 2020 SGC season. Maddie plays to and hits on his lanes extremely well. He reminds me of Iconic in the regard that he likes to play to jungle into lane as opposed to lane onto jungle. Similar to Iconic too, he's capable of becoming a primary carry who seeks to be the main beneficiary of what these plays generate. And unlike a lot of other players who play this sort of style, he's extremely good at converting these advantages elsewhere in order to create tangible team-wide advantages through objectives and other valuable resources he generates for his team. I really want to see more from Maddie, and maybe through a meta swap too later through the season, but I can't think of many other junglers that play the way he does in Amateur currently. Speaking of junglers, Cloud9's Exu is someone I've had my eyes on for a while. After SGC 2020, I had a list of 3 players for each role that I thought were underrated throughout the SGC, and Exu was one of the names I was watching out for. He plays a traditional lane onto jungle carry style like someone such as NXI or Kenvi. He's a completely raw talent, and while he's prone to repeating clears throughout his series to the point where it's exploitable, poor vision placement and control, and other general basic solo queue mistakes, he definitely has the bare-bone requirements to make a good jungler. Great mechanics, and as stupid as this sounds, great PvE in the regard that he usually can keep his HP high on the champions he needs to, i.e. not Olaf, and chooses pathing that generally maximizes his clear time. Exu is still a complete bonehead though, and to keep it blunt, he's still pretty stupid as a player, but those are the things that are easy to teach. He literally has nearly everything he needs in order to have a great starting advantage over the other jungle prospects. His Nidalee, Graves, Olaf are all clean. He has a Pocket Kayn and Kindred, and the meta overall looks really good for Exu, although I'm afraid he's not quite ready for a meta shift yet, but only time can tell. 2020 SGC's Long Beach Gerb Nation was referred to as NARNG by some people on the North American amateur community, from how they actively look to play through their bottom lane, Meech and King, and that bottom lane is retained in the totally not LCS organization affiliated team Mirage Esports. Throughout the SGC, Meech took the term resource hoarding to an all new level, and he continues to do so with the same core of players. I would not characterize Meech as defensive, although he is certainly the type to farm up until later game teamfights. He is not necessarily weak in laning phase, but he generally would prefer to eke out farm advantages and dominate teamfights, with a particular weakness towards an AD carry like Team Luke or Andy Bendy, who seek to actively trade and punish their enemy during the laning phase. In that regard, I'd compare Meech to someone like Spawn, and similar to Spawn, once Meech gets going, he really gets going, and is extremely solid in teamfights. He's very resource intensive, and also not one that's particularly apt to side laning, so much of his resources come at the expense of his solo laners, especially when they're incapable of side laning safely themselves, and his jungler. He is mostly well worth in this investment, however, since he is more than capable of becoming the primary carry his team needs. Winthrop's star players are likely their mid laner Doxa and support Certi. While many North American amateur mid laners are characterized by control mage, weak spine jungle slaves, I would know I was one, Doxa is much different. He was the best mid laner in Collegiate alongside maybe Darkwings, and his past as a Z1 trick in solo queue has lent him a strong disposition towards assassins and melee carries like Akali, Yasuo, and Irelia. He's capable of flipping on a dime too, and is more than comfortable on staple picks like Syndra and Orianna. To call his pool stylistically diverse is a complete understatement. Alongside that, his support Certi and his aptitude to read the map and create roams generates a massive carry threat in Doxa, whose comfort pool of side lane prone champions generates a nightmare threat for the enemy team to play against. Doxa is the Irelia who, when you send 4 people to stop pressuring your bottom lane, kills 3 of you and burns 2 of your flashes, while his team is doing Baron. Certi is the bard who roams mid on 6 after the enemy Syndra has slow built a wave against you, ults your tower, and kills you, causing you to lose 12 plus minions. These players are noteworthy alone, but together they're irritating to deal with, since Doxa is a relative anomaly in his versatility, while Certi excels at an aspect that many supports have a tendency to flounder with. Speaking of versatility, Super Sunshine Fruit Basket Warriors Papa Chow is pretty much the definition of it, reinventing picks like Trundle support into Samira. The departure of longtime AD carry duo Andy Bendy ends their partnership on a bittersweet note, since they were great for each other. Papa Chow is extremely aggressive in the laning phase, and no matter which team Chow finds himself on, it's going to be one of the bloodiest wherever he's playing. This is the consequence of being prone to enemy jungle intervention due to his high propensity to trade, pretty much to a fault. No matter the draft, no matter the game state, Papa Chow's lane is the one to watch in the game, because he is either going to end the game with 20 assists or 20 deaths. His mechanics are quite good, and he's generally capable of identifying favorable trades, and he understands his matchups, even on weird mad scientist picks, like Heimerdinger support or Trundle support. But his real issue comes into play when deciding whether he should do it, since his brain usually stops at whether he can do it. He is, without a doubt, one of the most entertaining supports to watch in amateur, even when he chain ints kills because he doesn't have an off switch. The final player I'd like to talk about is the newest mid laner for 100X, Young. While 100X have had a rough start to Risen, especially their support and top laner against a particular Kha'Zix one trick, who they didn't ban, who has a Twitter account about being a Kha'Zix one trick, Young still demonstrated great mechanics and wave control, even in bad matchups like Yone versus Annie, and he's selfless with his picks, blind picking mid lane. Unfortunately, I think 100X have some massive holes in their draft so far. I understand Yone is really OP, but banning him on red side here is pretty egregious with Malphite up. You could just ban Echo since Echo Kha'Zix is a strong 2v2, and hold the Malphites on 5 if they lock Yone on blue. They've already locked in 3 mostly physical picks, and while Shen isn't a great matchup in the top lane, it's still a compositional trump card. I guess I understand why you'd want to save R5 for support, but I have no clue why you'd burn a ban on a champion that realistically shouldn't be an issue if you're prepared for it. I love Young, but he has a hard time coordinating and communicating with his jungler, and 100X is just the newest iteration of this issue he's grappled with for a while. He's a great player and an exemplary mechanical prospect. He understands his matchups, and he's solid at side laning, but he's the textbook definition of a player who just needs a little more push to be academy ready. Young was the last player I wanted to cover in detail, but there's so many more I'd still like to talk about. ISU's AD carry Disconnector, Amateur Royalty, and the original Teamfight AD carry from the same class as Neo, Spawn, and Tactical. Revival's mid laner Sudsy, the original mid laner banned from Scouting Grounds due to his boosting history, whilst being one of the best mid laners each season he's played. alongside with his infamous signature pick Sigs. Sinus pleases top laner Eclipse, the top laner who originally had been offered a spot on Cloud9 Academy before plans fell through and they had acquired Fudge, who's one of the strongest top laners in Amateur and easily still Academy level if he can control his temperament while keeping up in his play. There's so many entertaining teams to watch this Proving Ground season, so I implore you to check out the unofficial Proving Grounds Twitter page, which routinely posts the streams of the teams who are not being officially broadcasted by Risen, or whichever tournament is occurring at the time. They're well worth your attention, and the link to their Twitter page will be in the description below. That's it from me. I wish I could talk more about these players, and I know I've pretty much repeated myself about how mechanically insane they all are, but with over 32 teams in Risen, there's bound to be some overlap between styles. There's 160 players competing, and while teams like Anu or Solafide are easy to pay attention to, the talent within these 11 players is a little more latent, but no less deserving of recognition. Thank you to KingMe as always for providing me with a thumbnail for this video. His Twitter will be in the description. And thank you for watching.